Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Ana Isabel. And my guest today is Paul Burton. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Nice to be here.
And Paul, you are, amongst other things, you are an EFT practitioner. And I thought it would be a really good place to start talking about your work by looking at EFT, because we've never had anyone on the program.
Okay.
Does EFT. So tell us, what is EFT?
So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. And basically it works on the simple concept that any dis-ease in the body is there because there is an interruption or a blockage in the flow of energy around the body. And by tapping on the meridian points on the body in a particular sequence, while stating out loud or in your head what your intentions are, you can clear the blockage and therefore can shift whatever the dis-ease is. So it's brilliant for illnesses. It's also very good for people that are nervous or anxious or all of those things, because there are ways where you can do this without anybody actually being aware you're doing it. So what I love about it is it's a tool that once people know how to do it, you can do it for yourself. I'm a great believer in giving people skills they can use rather than having to keep coming back to me in order to improve their lives. So that's what drew me to it.
So why should this technique help with physical problems?
Well, as I said, with physical problems, because it's a blockage in the energy system, simply by tapping and setting your intentions for what you're doing and what emotion you're looking to clear, this will clear it.
So EFT is working on the basis that everything has an emotional root, very much like
Exactly.
My hypnotherapist as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you clear the emotion, and that then allows energy to flow, and then whatever the dis-ease is passes out the system.
So tell us about where we would be tapping, how would we be tapping, what is involved?
So the tapping points are very simple. So there's one at the top of the head, one above the eye, one to the left of the eye, below the eye, just below the nose, the chin. There's one here on the collarbone, which is where the collarbone meets your shoulder. There's an angle just there. There's one just under the armpit, which you probably can't see very well. And that's it in terms of the face. As I said, you can also do it without anybody knowing, because you can just do it on the hands. So we have the karate chop point. So when we start, this is where we will always start, and then we will move to here and go around. And then you can tap on the wrist, you can't see here, on the wrist, and then gradually work through each of the fingers. And you can do this under a desk, in your pocket, anywhere that you can do it. And as I said, the intentions that you set, you can set out loud. You can also just set them in your head. Nobody knows.
So we're looking at energy points. We're tapping on energy points. Okay.
Yeah.
So how does this differ from, say, acupuncture?
No needles.
That's it.
Simple. Yeah, and the foundation of it was acupuncture, as I understand it, and I've seen people do it. There seem to be a gazillion different places in the ears, the back, and everywhere that you place the needles. When this first started, it was a very, very complex tapping. What's the word I'm looking for? Tapping process. There was a protocol. There was a different protocol. So you'd sit down with somebody, they'd have a conversation with you, they'd spend quite a long while diagnosing you, and then they'd work out exactly which points to tap on. And then what happened was Gary Craig started to look at this and realized that he was teaching these people all of these complicated tapping routes. And when he started reviewing his students' work, he identified that they were misdiagnosing the ailments that the people were coming to them with, and yet they were still getting the outcomes they were looking for. So he recognized that actually there's one very simple process, and if you follow that process, regardless of what you're trying to clear, you'll get the same result. So it's become much more accessible to everyone. And there are lots and lots of videos on YouTube, for example, where people will actually talk you through it as well, so that you get used to the protocol and you know, the setup phrases and what you're looking for in terms of the emotions. And actually, it's very simple. Any children can do it. I taught my daughter, she taught all her friends at school to deal with exam nerves and all kinds of stuff. It's just brilliant because it's so simple.
So you were talking about the hand. Are we saying that there are energy points in the hand that mirror those in other parts of the body?
They appear to, yes. They appear to.
So this is akin to the idea of reflexology, where the foot is a little microcosm of the body.
Yeah. And also the ears are the same, the ears apparently. So yeah, because I believe in your foot, you have the same number of bones on the instep of your foot as you have in your spine. So yes, it's all of those kinds of things. And there's another piece I do that I work now with Carl Dawson, which is about working using EFT in what he calls the matrix. And that's healing childhood traumas. So EFT is fantastic because what it does is it deals with the here and now. I have this emotion, I don't want this emotion, or I used it for indigestion. I have indigestion, I don't want it. So even though I set it up, I tap and the indigestion goes. And actually what I've noticed is it comes back much less, and it's a completely different feeling now. It's not a burning, it's just a pressure. So that's what's great about it. And when you work in matrix, which is where I would work with somebody that's a closed eye process, what's really important with that is they don't want you tapping all over them. So you can just tap on the hands whilst they're working in the matrix, and it still works. And you're frozen.
Yes, I think it's okay now.
Yes, so I don't know if you missed all of that.
No, I didn't. No, it was
good.
So if we're talking then about this matrix, and I think you call it matrix reprinting.
Reimprinting, yeah.
Reprinting, okay. So what does that actually mean?
Okay, so picture the scene, you know, I'm a little boy, I've done something and somebody shouted at me. And they may have been perfectly correct in shouting at me. It could have been to keep me safe. I make a decision at that point that means I'm bad, for example, or I can't be trusted, or the world's a dangerous place. I make that decision as a 6-year-old. That may never have been the intention of the person that shouted at me. That was what I chose to make it mean. And that creates what Carl calls a trauma capsule. And we have lots of them, and there are different types of trauma. So there are little t trauma, which is the voice shouted at, and there's big T trauma, which are, you know, the abuses and the things that we see that we shouldn't see as children and all of that. And obviously you deal with little t traumas and big T traumas in a similar way, but clearly the big T traumas, you have to be a lot more careful to spend time to make sure that people have safe spaces to go, etc. Ultimately, though, the concept is that we all have these trauma capsules, and as an adult, when somebody shouts at me, I go straight back to that memory, and I'm that 6-year-old again thinking, oh, and therefore that's how I react. So in and of itself, that's not a problem if it's keeping me safe. If in my life that is beginning to stop me from achieving my potential, or stopping me trying new things, or stopping me going out and learning something new, for example, because I'm going to get it wrong because I'm a bad boy, then I can choose to go work in that memory, tap on the little boy in that memory to resolve his trauma in that memory as a 6-year-old. So that's how you dial the trauma down in the matrix. And then the re-imprinting piece is you talk to, in my case, it was a little boy, in your case, it would be a little girl. I talk to the little me and say, actually, what would have made this a great day? Well, if I'd have had an ice cream, or if I'd have had a ride on a donkey, or if I'd have gone to the park with my dad, and whatever it is, because it's in your imagination, you can just go off and do it. And when you've built that experience up to a 9 or a 10, then you re-imprint by drawing that in through your heart and re-imprint that back out to change that memory. So then the next time somebody shouts at me, it just goes, yeah, it happens sometimes. And I don't get the reaction, particularly if it's a negative emotional reaction. That's gone. It's taken the trigger away.
So really what we're talking about here is, obviously, as a clinical hypnotherapist, I'm very familiar with this concept, and it's about going back to what I would call a sensitizing event, which sets up a series of beliefs which subsequently are reinforced and reinforced, and therefore the sensitivity increases as we go along, to the point where, you know, we could end up with a phobia. We could end up really managing our lives to avoid that type of feeling again. And so what we're saying is, rather than continue to be trapped in that moment, and many times it has to be said, people don't even remember what the sensitizing event was, that initial one. So this is about going back to that, opening it up. And what you're saying is that the tapping protocols that you use help, along with the imagination, to create a new perspective, a new way of dealing with a situation, which of course is then very helpful in the present. So that's very interesting. And I'm just wondering, listening to you, how that relates to EMDR, because with EMDR, of course, we're also looking at building new neural connections. Is that the same kind of idea with you?
Yes, and I'm sure with many of these things, with hypnosis, if you're working shamanically, where you're working with any kind of, you know, early life traumas, they're different routes in to the same place. And I spent a lot of my life, what drew me to EFT is I work in a corporate life, I work with CEOs and leaders, and it's all about, you know, personal development. And I also have a deeply spiritual side where I enjoy working shamanically and meditation and all those other things. And yet I couldn't see how the two would ever collide. So I've always been looking for this middle ground between the two, where if somebody is looking for a scientific explanation of it, there's science behind it. And if somebody's looking for a spiritual side of it, that's there as well. So that's what I love about the tool, is that all of that, and there are many other tools, you know, if you just look at simple NLP and some of the things that you can do with NLP, they're all doing the same thing, which is going back to a memory, changing that trigger point so that the next time the external stimulus comes in, the response is different. And I think about, you know, with a lot of these things, it's all of us have stuff happen to us. Two people can have an identical experience and make two different decisions about it. For one person, it can be deeply empowering. For another person, it can be deeply disempowering. That person made the decision, nobody else. And most of the time, they go unnoticed because they're not affecting our lives. What happens is every time that triggering event happens, it's like another drop of water going into a bucket. And as long as the bucket's below the top, it's fine. When the bucket starts to overflow, then we go into overwhelm, and that's when people come to talk to me, because they're having continuous repetitive thoughts and continuous challenges around this particular situation. And that's where going back, and you know, you may need to do, there may be several memories. So even if we can go back to, you know, what's the emotion, where are you feeling it? Can you remember a time you felt that before? And they'll take you back to that memory. And then you go to that memory and you ask the baby, the younger you in that memory, if there's somewhere else they'd like you to go. And once you're in your imagination, it's endless. You know, we tend to be told to not imagine anything and not dream anything. And it's a shame, because that's where all the juice is.
It is, because from an emotional perspective, if we just think about something that we are worrying about, what we are doing is we are imagining an outcome and we are projecting an emotion onto that possible outcome. And we've decided it to be a negative outcome. And so that energy behind that is fear. I am afraid that this is the outcome, but we experience it as it's definitely going to be that way. And we think that because of all our past experience, it's definitely going to be that way. And one of the things that I say, is imagine a different outcome.
Yeah.
And immediately when we imagine a different outcome, the feeling that changes. And sometimes people find it almost impossible to imagine a different outcome. They are so convinced that it's like it's happening right now. So it's happening right now, and they're going through all the feelings, and actually what they're doing is they're anticipating. And that's imagination. That's fear. And imagination is the same part of the brain that's being engaged in that moment. And what we want to do is retrain ourselves so that we understand that what we are anticipating is an imaginary outcome. So let's play a game. Let's see how many possible outcomes we can come up with. And immediately that we do that, we are detaching then from that worry, that fear. So these are very powerful and important ways that we can navigate through life perhaps more comfortably.
And the irony of it is, many of the people, as I said, my deeper spiritual self, I get lots of people that say, I don't believe in clairvoyance. They can't tell you what's going to happen. That's all rubbish. And yet, that's exactly what they're choosing to do. They're choosing to be clairvoyant and produce an outcome in the future that is definitely happening. And they're doing, and yet they don't believe in them. And apparently, animals are incapable of doing that. So if a dog walks into an electric fence and electrocutes itself, it knows that fence hurts. If it sees another fence, it will still go running up to it because it doesn't have that, that fence was, so this fence will be. It doesn't do that at all. We are the only people, as far as we know at the moment, we are the only people who are capable of taking a past experience and projecting into the future and then living our life according to it. And, fear is just false evidence appearing real. That's it. We
have to be careful with that assumption where animals are concerned, actually, because they do learn, and they do learn from experience, and they have that means that they have the ability to project to a certain extent. Right. So, if you have a bad experience, and I see this because I have dogs and he has many friends. I have a dog and he has many friends, and they do learn from experience. They have to, it's a survival mechanism. But what we do is we take it one notch up, in fact, several notches up, to the point where we become quite neurotic about it. So it's learning that that's not necessarily the case.
And the piece around that for me is around mindfulness, where because many of us are living in the future and forgetting to live in the now. Whereas my daughter has a small chihuahua, and he is in the now. He is never worrying about what's happening next. I mean, I know there's the piece around, I must eat all this food in case there's no more food. Actually, most of the time, he's absolutely rooted in the moment, in the now. And that is, so maybe it comes around, it's for me, they never take that experience and project it forward into a future that does not currently exist. So if they see that dog that barked at them last time that they don't like, they won't worry about that until they see that dog. Whereas we would say, we better not go out in case we see that dog. That's the piece that I think is slightly different.
So we need to be using our imagination more positively. I think that's definitely that's important. And tell us about your consciousness connection.
So conscious connections for me is the next piece. So what I found with EFT is, because you're asking somebody to tune into an emotion, a lot of people aren't aware of their emotions. And so they're not aware of how their bodies are reacting to what's going on around them. And again, this can lead to burnout, stress, and all of that. And it's because we spend most of our life living up here because the brain's in charge, and it's not. Actually, we're human beings, not human doings. So it's about the experience of being, which is an emotion. So the conscious connections piece is reconnecting people to their core, their soul, whatever that is, and that's their essence, the piece of them that was present at birth, capable of anything and everything. And as all of the experiences as we've grown up get layered on top, we forget and disconnect from that. So the idea of conscious connections is that once we become conscious, and it's the same with, we put up with something and then one day, I really don't like that. I've now become conscious of it. As soon as I have consciousness of it, I have a choice to change it. So where conscious connections doing is, first of all, getting people more conscious of what's going on for them, and then connecting them back to their potential when they were born and allowing them to make the decisions and live from their gut or their intuition, as opposed to from their heads.
I think this is an important part of the process, because really what we're talking about is developing an awareness of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, an understanding of how everything is working within us. And so it's an important part of the process of healing.
I'm not quite sure what happened there. I lost you.
Okay. Okay, so developing awareness is one of the important parts of healing, of the therapeutic process. And whether I'm working as an astrologer, helping somebody look in the mirror and have an understanding that way, or whether I'm guiding someone through a hypnotherapy process where they're looking at memories which have been hampering them in some way and helping them to see the connection to the thing that happened yesterday and why it was such an issue. What really we're doing is we're saying we need to understand ourselves better. We need to have a deeper awareness of what makes us tick and why it is that certain things are problematic for us, and how we can then move beyond that. So yes, being conscious is very much a part of the process, because if we are conscious, it means that those things that would normally bother us, as we're about to react, we can get that little bit of detachment that is going to make us think, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe our default is always to assume we're being rejected.
Yeah.
And perhaps that doesn't have to be our default anymore.
Exactly.
Because we weren't even aware that we were anticipating rejection. But now we're aware that this is one of our patterns. One of our, I don't like using computer language because I'm getting a bit fed up with people comparing us to computers. We're not computers. But that is a good word to use just at this moment. That let's use the word conditioning. The conditioning that we have got ourselves into due to of very sensitizing events early on, we are now conditioned to expect that we're going to be rejected. So it only takes somebody saying something that's questioning, not even critical necessarily, and already we're feeling criticized, we're feeling rejected. But now here's the difference. We know that that's how we normally react. And we have learned that perhaps that's an overreaction.
Yeah.
And just before we're about to act on that feeling, we think, okay, I'm going to count to 10 and perhaps try a different response.
Yeah.
Or I don't have to respond in this moment right now. Maybe I can take a loo break and come back to this.
Yeah.
And think it through. That's freedom, isn't it? And
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That's the freedom that's in the title. It's a promise that once you free, once you have that deeper awareness, you are free to choose how you're going to.
Absolutely, and it is that choice is where our freedom lies. And it's if you look at Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, it's what he said: between stimulus and response, there is choice. And EFT is, for some people, is enough to dial down the response. With conscious connections, it's about, the connection piece then is the connection is my purpose and what I was born to do, and I've become disconnected from it. When I become more connected to it and aware of my emotions, I then get to choose how to respond. So it could be that, I have a small comfort zone because I choose not to do that because I'm not tall enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not clever enough. That's not true. It's clearly not true for most of us, most of the time. Clearly, I'm not going to be a rocket scientist. I'm not going to work for NASA. However, that doesn't mean I'm daft. It simply means that there would be some work to do for me to get there. So once I recognize that those things are keeping me stuck, I get to choose to do something about them, exactly as you say. And the other piece, something else you said around this idea of projecting into the future, is that, first of all, the past, there's no reason for the past to equal the future. However, for many people, their experience is that because they focus so intently on that terrible future, that's the future they create for themselves. So we have the option to notice these things, to grow our comfort zones, and then shift our focus. So if I'm focusing on something and it's making me feel bad, or it's making me feel uncomfortable, I can ask myself, is it appropriate for me to feel this uncomfortable? And if it is, okay, I'll feel uncomfortable for a while. And then I can choose to feel something else. Quite often, when we actually begin to ask ourselves, is it appropriate for me to be this uncomfortable about the situation? The answer is no. And therefore, by choosing to then focus on something that we're more comfortable with, that starts to move us on as well. And then we start to step into our power. And actually, our power comes from within. It's not outside, it's not status, it's not money, it's none of those external things. Internally, if I choose to feel powerful, I am. And interestingly, when you work with people, or when I work with people around this, you see a shift in their physiology when they breathe into their center. And you can see their voice drops, and you can just see the way they look. Everything shifts. It's small, it's not huge. And that's where people are beginning to claim their power. So that's the start of the process. And then it's anchoring people into, if everything that you wanted, all your hopes and dreams came true right now, and you could feel it, where would you feel? What would you feel? What would it look like? Would it have a name? Would it have a shape, a color, a weight, a temperature? Exploring all of that. And what that's really doing is just putting people back in touch with their intuition. So shamanically, I get that science says that IQ's up here, EQ's my heart, SQ, which is the next one that's coming, the spiritual quotient, is the gut. And that's, IQ says I know how to do the right thing. EQ says that I do it in a way and I'm cognizant of everybody else and the impact it has. SQ says this is why it's important for me to do this. And so once you link to that, you can make better judgments about if that situation makes me uncomfortable and it runs counter to actually my core, I can start to take my power back and choose to focus in other places.
So we can think about, you were talking about, we can consider whether a response is appropriate. And somebody might say, well, it's a feeling. Feelings are never inappropriate, which is true. But the question is it proportionate? Is it in proportion to the event? So it's, the question is, am I overreacting? Is it in proportion? If I want to fling something at someone because they have bumped into me as I'm walking down the road, is that a proportionate response? No. And if the answer is no, then you know that there's something that you need to explore, because clearly you're feeling very vulnerable. Maybe you feel that you don't command any respect from anyone. So let's come back and work through that. And you were talking about the gut, and we call that the second brain, because there's the neurotransmitters that we associate with the brain are also being produced in the gut. So it's a very important thing. And we say that we have a gut feeling. We almost instinctively know that our gut also tells us what to do. It's our heart and it's our gut. And so if we're following that, as you called it, intuition, and if somebody else might call it that gut feeling, and
wisdom.
Because what you have is a higher sense of something that you can't quite put your finger on. You can't yet explain it, which means your brain is trying to piece it together, but you kind of know that this is where you want to go. Yeah. So let's explore that. What is it's do we need to do a little bit of experimentation to discover? It might be as simple as looking at courses online and explore whether anything that you see speaks to you. It's a very exciting process when you start opening the doors.
Absolutely. And the connection piece for me is it's connection to source, whatever that is for you, because this is not people get confused with spiritual intelligence that it's to do with religion, and it's absolutely nothing to do with that, really, though. It's a connection to source, whatever that source is for you. However, that's how we came in. That's how we were connected. And when you watch young children, all they're doing is what makes them feel good, safe, or everything. And then what happens is, as we go, oh, don't do that, don't go near that, be careful of that, watch out for that. And we give them all of these, or we're given all of these things that we choose. And again, this is where the EFT links back in. Those beliefs drive our behaviors. So once we get them out of the way and get back to our core connection and start making our decisions from there, because this is brilliant, but this is Google. I know you don't like computers, and I get it, but if I'm I'm feeling uncomfortable, my brain goes, oh yeah, hold on, let me just Google uncomfortable. Oh, there's 7,365 examples of what feeling uncomfortable feels like. That's brilliant. And that's not what I was choosing at all. That's where my focus was. So that's the piece, really, is learning that actually emotions are simply signposts. And I accept my piece is, there are no good or bad emotions. There are just emotions. And my appropriate or inappropriate is exactly what you said. It's situational. If you've just had a breakup with someone that you've had a relationship with, is it reasonable to be upset and distraught and sad? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's fine. And, it's all about working out, exactly as you said, throwing somebody at something at someone who's just knocked you isn't. However, that their emotion was there. So it's noticing it and deciding whether it's appropriate or not. And knowing that we have the choice. What I found empowering myself doing this work is I'm now in control of my life, not anybody else. I was like probably many people, well, when I get that, I'll be happy. And when I get that, I'll be happy. And then when I get that, I'll be happy. One day, the 8th day of the week, one day, and actually, I just choose to be happy. And you know what? I am. And the other piece of the universal truth is that once I start to focus on those night classes you were talking about, or people, they actually start to pop up. I don't actually have to go look for them at all. They find me. So then you start linking into cosmic ordering and all of the, so yeah, there's a, you know, and the science around it is the reticulator, which is that, you know, whatever you decide to focus on, your reticulator, I think, is like a radar to keep you safe, will look for. So, you know, my daughter recently bought a new car. She bought a Peugeot 108. It's a fantastic car. I'd never noticed them on the road before. Now, everywhere I go, I see Peugeot 108s because that's where my focus is. And therefore, my brain goes, oh, there's another one, there's another. They were there all the time. It was filtering out the stuff that wasn't necessary. And we can do that with experiences as well. We can choose to pick the ones that are enriching for us. And sometimes enriching ones are uncomfortable. So this is not, just to be very clear, this is not about positive mental attitude. It's not toxic positivity. It's okay to feel sad. And I feel sad sometimes as well. What's important for me is I know that I have a way of shifting that when it's appropriate.
And I think, you know, what is that if once you get into a certain mind frame, it's about, we start noticing things. So like your example of the car, it's like our eyes are open to things that we did not see before. So this is a fantastic way to gain that sense of understanding and opening. And I just want to thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
You're very welcome. It's been great talking to you.
And if people want to find out more about your work, how do they do that?
So the EFT is on tappingforsuccess.co.uk. And Conscious Connections is Conscious Connections, where the E of connections is the number 3.co.uk. And the reason for that is because of the 3s in terms of IQ, EQ, and SQ. And also it's a 3-step process with 3 1-hour sessions, followed up by 3 months of videos, of which you get 3 a month. So I like the number 3. Hence the 3 in the title.
So I will be putting a link to both on the description box. Thank you so much, Paul.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for watching. And until next time, goodbye.